This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
We're trying.
All right, if everyone's ready, I will make a motion to open the Board of Public Works meeting for June 1st, 2022 at 5:21 p.m.
And I will second that.
Salisbury,
Yes.
Dave Beckman,
Yes.
Steve Whitman is not with us, so all in favor, motion carries.
All right, we do not have any members of the public joining us this evening, so we'll skip public speak. Are we expecting the mayor to weigh in on anything this evening? All right, we'll move on to item number 3, approval of the May 18th, 2022 meeting minutes.
I did review.
Any issue? If not, I will make a motion to approve as prepared.
I have no issues.
All right. Is that a second?
Second.
All right.
Salisbury,
Yes.
Dave Beckman,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Multitask was overwhelming.
All right, we'll move on to item number 4. Mike Schrader's joining us from Ty and Bond to give the board an update on the progress of rate setting.
All right, thank you. My name is Mike Schrader, Ty and Bond. Going through tonight, I wanted to present at least I want to say it's a draft, a rough draft of having sort of gone through the whole exercise, touched the other side of the pool and came back. We have things that we can at least talk about and discuss. There's a lot of moving parts to this. I'll try not to go into too much detail in the weeds. You can always just pause me, zoom in, zoom out, whatever.
Okay.
The biggest part that we're going to want to talk about is obviously the capital, which is always the driver for bigger rate increases. And I don't remember if I covered all of this last time, but just briefly, when we're looking at rates and setting water and sewer rates, number one is the most important part is to recover your full cost of service, which means, the DPW has a job to do and they have a level of service to maintain, which includes regulatory, which is a big part of it, and it includes customer expectations and, delivering mostly water. Nobody really cares about sewer, but bringing, drinking water and taking care of the storm water and the sewer as well. You're fully staffed and have a proactive repair and maintenance program. That right there is the standard of care for DPW. The rest of it doesn't apply so much to this conversation, so I'll just move on. The way that we look at these, this is similar to what we did before, so I won't go into too much detail, but we develop a pro forma by looking at what your expenses are going to be for the next, in this case, 10 years. And that's a combination of operating expenses, your existing debt, which is almost non-existent, and then the capital plan. And then on the other side, we look at projecting your revenues. So we look at your water use trends and the existing rate structure and project revenues from there, what they're going to look like. And then we adjust rates to basically maintain a fund balance of about 20% of your operating expenses. That's sort of our default. We can always revisit that or whatnot. One thing that's very interesting about Easthampton, as you know, is that you have water and sewer in one enterprise. And in some ways of looking at it, it's complicated because if you're trying to model them separately, it's kind of tricky to separate some of the stuff. But it gives you flexibility, and meaning that you have 2 pots that you collect money from, but it all goes into the same account. So you can be flexible with that. And, for example, when we get to the end, you see the rate increases for sewer are quite a bit higher than water. You could balance those if it makes sense and, raise funds both ways. because it's the retained earnings that's going to fund a lot of the work going forward. So, starting with water, and I did prepare separate models like we did before. The places where they intersect are indirects, which are happily divided by utilities, so that was helpful. And then the retained earnings. So the retained earnings, I split them based on the percentage of budget. So it's basically 70-30 sewer to water. And then indirects, yeah, I don't know what I was just going to say. So, stormwater is in sewer, but it's not distinguishable. Sewer is broken into wastewater treatment plant and sewer. Stormwater is just mixed in there, and you really see it as the capital. When we get there, I thought it would be helpful to summarize the capital projects for sewer by pump station, treatment plant, and stormwater, so you can see where the money's going. It'll help, because I think that was part of the discussion in the beginning was stormwater utility, is it worth it? Is it, is there enough of a, and I would encourage everybody to think about stormwater utilities as a sort of like a financing method where, you're going to buy a car, do you want to go through, the dealer, the manufacturer, your credit union or whatever. It's just, you need the thing is what we want to talk about first, and then how to pay for it is second, in my opinion anyway. So,
So Mike, clarify. When you say sewer water 70-30, you mean the sewer operating expenses are 70%?
I just looked at the whole budget. I took the two budgets.
No,
added
the
them
whole
together.
budget, and that's including projected capital costs?
Yeah. Yep. And
Okay.
it was
Yeah.
70-30 last time too, so.
Okay.
But again, and I confirmed with, some other people that, yeah, you do have that flexibility to use the retained.
No, I understand that, yeah.
All right.
But I just mean just in general.
Yeah, yeah.
Sort of the magnitude of the two
Right,
departments.
right.
Yeah, okay.
It seemed like a manageable way to look at them. So we start with operating expenses, which are the easiest ones, I think. And we look at the last 3 years, or 4 years actually, and then the 23 budget. So just looking at, this is water first, looking at personnel services, purchase of services. I didn't want to reclassify the cost because it makes it more difficult for, I'm presenting stuff in a different way than the people are used to seeing it, so I don't want to keep, adding barriers to it. So purchase of services is like everything. There's personnel, purchase of services, capital, and that's about it. So we looked at what the budgets have been and what the FY23 budget looks like, the unsigned version. The takeaway here is that the future costs are going to be based on this FY23 budget with the escalator shown here. So escalators are a real crapshoot right now. It's especially when you get to capital. I'm carrying on both water and sewer 3% increase for personnel services, which is usually limited by agreements or whatnot, and 5% for purchase of services. I would suggest at this point that we update this every year, or I can show you guys how to do it just to check against the assumptions, because who knows, everything seems to be kind of crazy right now. So for water, I wanted to start with water because it's easier. So we have the capital projects here came from the the IWRMP from 2018. The city went through and looked at those, ranked them, and added some other notes, and some other projects actually got added in here. So for water, it was pretty straightforward. One thing, Greg, is I didn't carry anything that had an F that said it was funded.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure, because when people say what's funded, like, where is it? I want to see it. Is it in the budget? Is it in, so especially with capital, it's hard to tell how that gets sort of budgeted, because it's not in your budgets, and it's, so I can see what you've spent, but it's hard to see what's budgeted. So I took those costs, and what the city had also done, or DPW did, was put them in a criticality order, which was really just primary, what should you call it? Basically immediate, priority, high priority, and that was the first 5 years. And then, it sort of begs that the rest go into the next 6 to 10. So we can talk about that and maybe even push some out further if you want. But I tried to stay with that, stay with the 5 years. Nothing that was funded is in there. And then I also condensed these columns because it just wouldn't fit on a sheet. The interest rates, I assumed 3% borrowing for debt. And when I talked to Greg before, we said, well, most of it just gets funded by retained earnings or from budget capital. But when we looked at the total magnitude of expenses, I don't really think there's any feasible way to do it without debt. So I debted projects that I thought made sense to do that. And when you get to the rate impacts, a fallback position is to then bundle other projects that aren't. And so instead of doing this, and this, and paying out of your pocket, you say, all right, we're going to do them all as one project and debt that project, and we can talk about that. So the important things here are going to be the start year, and that's the year that the cost hits the enterprise. So if with debt, it's I'll have people say like, oh, we're going to do it this year. I'm like, so is the design done? Well, no, we haven't hired an engineer. I'm like, well, okay, you're not going to do it this year. It's we're trying to keep, a little bit out. One of the other things to think, Greg, is that most of the costs, and most budgetary costs for projects include engineering, permitting, contingencies, and all that. And that's fine for budgetary when it's 3, 4, 5 years off. When you start to get close, you're going to need to start pulling those apart and funding them separately. I didn't do that. I did a little bit on wastewater, and I'll show you that. I didn't want to start messing with it too much because you have to dig back and see, well, what did they carry for contingencies? What was in there? So just keep that in mind when we're talking here, that as you get closer, you want to start separating those costs because you're going to fund them differently and you're going to fund them at different times. Engineers, we have the luck of being the first cost, so it always seems like a lot of money at that time. So there was a couple items on the bottom that didn't have costs in there, and we need to just circle back on that. General distribution system, pipe and valve. I was tempted to throw something in there, but I didn't want to just throw something in there. And by the way, the water guy, sorry, Clay, he mentioned that his priorities were SCADA and the dump truck, and pipes 8 and 9. So I put those, front loaded those, and on the water side, there was only 2 projects for SCADA upgrades. It was 2 pump stations. And what I've done here is, again, we can explode it later, but I combined them, all right? And I used the IWRMP cost, and then I escalated that. I'm carrying 8% a year for escalations, and they probably could be 15%, but I don't want to get thrown out of the room. So, and that actually works out pretty well with what we were talking about, the 1.4 for going from 18 to 22. So the escalated cost is the escalation to the year that you're going to do it. And if you have like your, on the wastewater, you had a project that's already on the IEP for SRF, I didn't escalate that because it's like a done deal, so anyway. And then taking this is the summary of the expense side of the pro forma for water. There are still a few little things that are a little bit of a mystery to me. The transfer outs are, and historically you've budgeted about $15,000 per water and per sewer for that. I don't know where it goes, and for sewer I think I carried $15,000, on water I didn't. So
It goes to the enterprise reserve fund.
is that the same as retained earnings?
No, it's different.
Okay, so I did see on the revenue reports, the budget to actuals, there's a transfer out to a trust or department or something kind of cryptic. And then I did see actually transfers back in from, say, capital. So there wasn't a lot of money though, so I didn't worry too much about
It was
it.
a few years ago, it could be from when we were in Hampshire County Trust for Insurance.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah, because a trust is usually not a word we see.
That has since changed. And it's just employee benefits.
So, if there's a pot of money somewhere that's, separate from the enterprise, meaning it's not just your retained earnings, then we should talk about that.
No, there's not anything you see budgeted for the year at the end of the year is turned back to retained earnings.
Including the transfers?
Yeah. Well, the 50. Without having more information of what that exact 50,000 is, we do have an enterprise reserve account.
Yep.
15,000 in it throughout the fiscal year. We generally don't use it, and it's then turned back to retained earnings.
So
My understanding of it.
you just maintain 15,000 for in case the
If we need-
copier breaks, but you're not piling that up every year. It's not another 50. Okay, fine. Okay, so
That's my understanding. I'd have to double check with the auditor's office on that, but everything, to my knowledge, goes back to retained earnings
Yep.
involved when they're certified.
So the capital outlay that's shown here is from that, the CIP that I showed you a minute ago. And the capital outlay is what we consider rate or pay-as-you-go funding. It's not debt. It's either out of reserves or operating capital or whatnot. And the debt service would be for projects that we debted, and I'm sorry, the debt service is your existing debt, which goes away in 22 or went away in 22. And that's probably one of the hardest things to convince people of, is that a utility has been underfunded. And when I look at debt, it's great to see you have no debt, but then I flip around and say, well, there's nothing been done in 20 years. So
Right, yeah, no,
it's-
we're well aware of
okay,
that from the
all right.
previous.
Yeah, well, I know. It's
Yeah.
just, it's a hard thing to explain because people don't care.
No,
We
yeah.
have to change, So looking at your water, it looks like you're going to need to increase your budget, if you will, by about 40% from 23 to 28. And I just use that as you guys are more engaged than sometimes a lot of public boards are, so I just want them to know that,
Yeah, no, that's-
what you're looking at, which is really not that bad.
But it gets us sort of to where we should have been operating, in a sense.
Well, like I said, when I, like other people, when I'm showing them as percentages, people get, agitated, they get incensed, whatever. And then you get to the end and say, well, it's $100. And they go, oh. Well, I don't know what it's going to be either till the end, because when I was doing the sewer, I'm like, oh my God, these are crazy. And you get to the end and you see, well, they're really not that bad. So, so when we talk about revenues, the bulk of your revenue, the extreme bulk of your revenue, comes from water bills and water usage. So 90% of your total revenue is from the actual water bills, customer bills, and 100% of that water bill is basically from usage. So what we look at is, we don't project revenue per se, we calculate it. So we look at the historic water use and see what are the trends. It's very rarely just staying the same. So we look at it and see, is it going up, is it going down? The whole enterprise here, the whole project here, I try to be conservative low. So if we're off, I want to be off in the black. And so I looked at this and said, well, we're going to say that water use is decreasing by 1.2% a year, which is not a lot. But it's important to remember when you look at rate increases that that's like a headwind. So if you need 5% increase, you need really 6.2 just to overcome the loss. Yep. So, okay, well then I'll get to a more content-packed slide here. So this is the pro forma for water, and it looks at the rate revenue, which is again projected. And we modify that by a collection ratio and a liens, penalties, and prior year, although you guys don't collect prior year. The goal is to try to approximate what we think is going to be actual receipts. On the other hand, the expenses are budget expenses. So again, it's conservative because in most cases you're spending less than your budget. And then it gets, a little complicated with encumbrances and whatnot. So anyway, the goal is to keep the retained earnings, that yellow line on the bottom, to be around 20% or 20% or more. And so looking at the increase in operating expenses and new debt and whatnot, we have looked at increasing by 4 tens for FY '24, 5, 6, and 7.
Right.
And then you can see I truncated the tabular part because it just doesn't fit well.
Right now.
And so on the bottom, you can see that after that, there's another 10, a 3, and a 2 way at the end, just to kind of round things off. So, and then, like I said, the fund balance is based on 30% of the total for water. And let's see if there's anything else. Didn't really go into it here, but we looked at your non-rate revenue. On both water and sewer, it's pretty small, so it was about 50 grand a year in just random, proceeds and whatnot. So I carry that every year as a projection going forward. Didn't see a lot of like connections and stuff, and your usage, your customer base is pretty stable. It's like 4 or 5 customers a year, so not too much of a.
That 50,000 say is non-revenue, is connected, it would be connection fees, scrap.
Right. Yeah. It's and that's common. We just take an average, call it a conservative number.
Transferments, insurance claims.
Right. So looking at sewer. Sewer is much bigger, and more going on with it. The sewer itself is that half of the enterprise is further broken down into wastewater treatment plant and sewer. So I maintain that because even though you don't really cost or budget them separately, it's the way the numbers are, and it helps to look at them that way. So same idea, looked at the last 4 years, and we use the same escalators for personnel and purchase of service, 3% and 5%. And that's about it. Going forward, we're going to use the same thing. We're going to project on that. And I also, Greg, I look at the delta between the last year and the year before, or your current year and the year before, because it helps me get insight into what you're thinking. And if you're thinking things are going to, start going up, and they were pretty modest, I would say, the whole way through. Although the sewer went up by almost 5% from 22 to 23, but I still kept it at 3% because I don't know. I don't usually see personnel services go up that much.
Yeah, we had a couple bargaining contract changes that were at the same time, supervisors and with a larger employee union, so that's probably.
So again, you have another, the models are built, so tweaking things is not difficult. And remind me in a minute, I'll get back to the indirects when I show the total for here. So the sewer capital is, again, it's from the IWRMP, which had a pretty fine level of detail. Things were broken down into small elements. The ones that are black here, are bold rather, are the projects that are amalgamated, like I bulked them together. The ones that are yellow, I just had a question on, just want to confirm some of the costs that were in there are annual costs for stormwater activities and memberships and things. So you see on the first one, it was $65,000. And actually talking to Tracy, we decided, it's probably a lot less than that. So I divided it by 10 and called it 6,500. That kind of little, bric-a-brac. Some of the other ones, I just wasn't sure what they were when I looked at them, like IDDE, remediation costs. Some of that stuff probably just goes away, but even though you guys spent a lot of time looking at, I think once you start to see it in time, it would be good to take another look and talk about that. So the items that were like Love Field Street, pump station improvements, there was a half a dozen little things. So I just aggregated them together. And I was curious that, since we're looking at this, the Drury Lane storage tank upgrades, is that a wastewater?
No, that should be on the water.
That's what
But
I
it
thought.
was on the water also.
It was on the water, yeah.
Okay. I'll move that.
Non-tuck pump station HVAC should be on the water side.
We have it on the water side for 2027
Okay.
for 29,000. Here you have it for 32 on 28.
Yeah, so what I'm not
Oh,
showing
because it got
here-
escalated one more year.
Yeah, I combined the original cost because there was just too many columns.
No, I got you.
Same thing down here, annual training, the stormwater utility feasibility study. I took that out because I figured that's what we've been doing. Again, additional street sweeping, annual costs, you know, 283,000. It seems like a lot. I want to make sure if it is annual, we're not carrying it every year. And then also, maybe that should be carried in your operating budget, you know, versus capital, but we can talk about that.
The water ones are showing up again there too.
Okay.
Just, I mean, it's a draft, you know?
Yeah, well,
Just want to make you aware.
Yeah, they're all on WTP.
Yeah.
well, this is sewer, so this is, oh, wait, Nonotuck is a water?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I'll have to,
And so is Pines. Torrey Street is a wastewater pump station.
okay. Well, that's interesting. I'll go back through.
Yep, we can review them.
Yeah, because I didn't. Yeah.
Or
Okay.
code them differently in the future for you.
Well, yeah. I like to put the water with the water, but I thought I took those from the source data. But anyway, there were some things in here that didn't have any price. There was nothing for dam repairs, and somewhere I saw something from the dam fund, you know, like a repair fund. So we should revisit that and make sure that we're on the same page. But then at the bottom, you know, putting aside the water and the sewer projects, I just wanted to show, a lot of this work is to go back to the public and show people what you're talking about, what you're doing. So I wanted for this discussion to at least see what stormwater looked like as a percentage of the total.
Yeah.
And then at the bottom, I actually called it out as a percentage. So, you know, I think the total, the highest is 30% in 2030. And for the rest of it, it's, you know,
That's actually surprising, yeah.
low single digits.
Yeah, that could be, because there's some start years at 2030,
Right.
which might be...
Staggered a little more.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, and that's part of the discussion too, is when we talked about the capital, like I said, I know you guys went through it and spent a lot of time on it. When you start to put them in time, that's what sets the rate slope. That's
Yep,
what is
yeah.
going to cause your, you know,
No, and I think this is a good thing for us to work from, to say, can we phase these from 2028 to 2032, or, you know, like,
what I envisioned was
instead of having a big, large blip in
well, yeah,
1 year.
was a second workshop to just
Yep, yeah,
do
we
some
gotta
horse
digest
trading
all this.
on that. So then doing the same thing, summarizing the costs. The indirects, by the way, I took the two, I had 20 and 21, and then projected the rest of them, I believe, based on 4.5% increase a year. And I had that number in there, and I think that either we talked about it before or what, but I broke out the indirects. It only gives it for sewer, so it's really, I didn't try to break it down to sewer and WWTP.
Yeah.
But it includes both. And then, again, just to help understand where the money's going, I broke out the capital, the budgetary capital, or the rate funded by sewer, wastewater treatment plant, and stormwater. And then debt service is all debt, which isn't really that much. Or I take it back, there was a couple of projects that were big projects that were debted. And one of the other things, Greg, to circle back on too, is to make sure that wastewater treatment plant aeration and outfall upgrades, the project cost was like 13 million, but the avoided costs, or the IWRMP costs that went with that, I think, was only like 2.5 million. So I want to make sure I'm not double counting by leaving other things that really would have been in there. But I looked for anything that said aeration basin safety, outfall, that kind of thing. So And then, oh yeah, there we go, general dam repair fund. So I don't know where that was. That was just in there, didn't have any money associated with it, so.
It was an item we wanted to start discussing, because Cottage
Yeah.
Street Dam and
Yeah.
Dam on Ferry Street is also going to be something that we're going to have some financial.
Right, I would actually, I'm gonna go so far as to request if we could do a workshop on you know, digging into the back matter on this. For what it's worth, in the model, I have your sheet on the backside, and I pulled the information forward, so I maintained, you know, what was there in terms of, you know, the other additional data that you guys had. So, and then also on, I always get a little nervous when it's the current budget year. So we had new debt starting, but I don't know that's really going to start. You know, if that's, because it's still not 100% clear to me how you budget for new debt service and capital and stuff like that. So it's not in your budget per se, but then it'll be in the actuals the next year. So,
So
you know,
the 690 that you have there would be if we did take that SRF loan out for 13 million.
that was, oops. Actually, it was the,
Aeration.
aeration and outfall upgrades, the design. I put that as debt. And again, this is a draft, but it's not an SRF eligible cost of the design. So what I see a lot of communities do is they'll do a ban or they'll do a short-term loan, like 5 years. And we estimated $3 million for design.
5-year loan.
Yeah.
At that. Okay.
But that's a great point for your treasurer or your finance director to say, no, this is what we're going to do, and you know, whatever, however they want to do it, we can change that too. And like similarly, the pump station elimination project, you had a project cost for that, and whatever. There was a bunch of miscellaneous pump station projects that
Yes.
could also be bundled
Yep.
if you wanted to. Okay, so come down here, and same thing, except now it's about 70%. And I, again, tried to differentiate here between wastewater treatment plant, sewer, and stormwater, just to, I don't know, whenever you say I need more money, people say, where's it gonna go? So that's my goal with doing this, is to be able to then reflect it. Because, and the way that we've been working is, the goal is informed decision-making. So I want you guys to understand what it is that went into this, and in as much detail as you want. So when you see all those rate increases, to me, one of the most important ways to evaluate that is to look at in terms of a typical residential customer. And I use the word typical versus average because there's some people that use a ton of water, and I like to think of it as like a serving size. Like, this is an allotment. This is 3 people using 60 gallons per day each. 60 gallons per day is like a nationwide average. Yours is actually a little bit lower, which is good, but it's not 10 people, it's not an apartment building, whatnot. When we get to the end, we can look at like top 10 users or customers. So again, I don't want you to be blindsided by, oh, this isn't bad, but then the big, company or whatever that uses a ton of water, you want to make sure the mouse is, tricky. So what this shows is the estimated annual cost for that family or that household using 180 gallons a day. And I should have put the rate increases here, but there were some big ones on the sewer, like 20%, 25%. And that translates into, at the most, $180 a year for sewer. And, combining them again to look at the total, because that's how affordability is looked at, and that's, I think, how people look at it, is $213 would be the biggest hit. And then the next year is another $118. And then from there it gets a little bit less. And I cut out every other year because it just fits better. So,
Okay, I missed that.
Well,
No, I'm
try not-
yeah, no,
we're all wearing glasses as it is. I don't want you to have to wear.
Nope, I was looking at the bottom numbers. I wasn't looking at the FY year, so I didn't notice it was odds.
So when we talk about affordability, it is, and I don't remember how much of this we talked about last time, but it's a really difficult conversation to have, and people think all different things, and it, frankly, doesn't always lead in productive areas. So one of the things we use is one of the industry standards, which is the household burden indicator. And instead of using the median household income, we use the lowest quintile. So that's the 20th percentile incomes. And we take the total cost of water and sewer, divide by that, and that gives you the household burden index. And then the second part is the poverty prevalence indicator, and that's the percentage of your community that is at or below 200% of the federal poverty level, which is another federal indicator that's used for entitlement programs and benefits and stuff. And you enter the 2 in here, and you see, okay, so we're in that farthest column on the right, the less than 20%, and our HBI, without increasing the income at all, I hold it steady to see, how it works out. It's still considered to be a low burden. And I was, I don't know, I figured if I wasn't surprised, somebody else would be, to see, those kind of increases and then still have it be considered to be a low burden. So what I did was I went back and I looked at our last rate survey in Massachusetts. Unfortunately, it was 2017. We're trying to redo that this year. But back in 2017, you were about where the average was in 2006, between 2006 and 2009 for sewer, and for water, even less, was, between, roughly 2005. So that is a difficult message to, get people to buy into, but at the same time, it's just showing that the reason why big increases aren't, hitting as a economic impact or a financial burden is because they were low to begin with. So that is, my analogy for that is if your gas station downtown is selling gas for $2.50 and you say everybody else is paying $5, they're like, yeah, I like $2.50. Go away. So it's a hard argument to make, but I think that's your case, is that, there's a backlog of work that needs to be done. You saw by the size of the CIP for sewer, there's a lot of work to be done. And so, from there, it's more talking about strategy and funding, grouping, scheduling, that kind of thing. You guys, this is great. You guys went through that pretty well, and that's the last slide.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
So, what I wanted to do was to get from you all. You're gonna have questions. I would have questions. I do have questions. And what the next step is? What are the, what do you need to decide when? And if you're going to set rates for a year, I think that's fairly easy, right? We can look at this. We can, make some. You don't have to figure out everything out. You have to figure out what's going to start in 23, 24. That's where we're going. And then what you're comfortable with, what more information you need, that kind of thing. And then I don't know how it works, Greg, but I would like to re-engage with you guys on.
Oh yeah, no, this is going to be a process.
What do you, how do you want to do that? Because, in addition to being an informed decision-making process, it's data-driven, so that if you have somebody that's, you can click, and you can say, well, this is where this was, and then make a decision on that. So that's it.
Yeah, I think.
It's much smoother than you guys are right. It feels like we just worked on this yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're taking a good approach to it.
Yeah, no, and I think what I would like to see is if you could go through the 2 listings and verify what goes to what fund.
Yeah.
If we could get an updated version of it, basically with no other tweaks. I mean, if you wanted to change the years a little bit to sort of spread some of them out. I think this is something we could work off of as a board in some workshops and make publicly available, even in this draft form for input. That way people can show up to our workshops and stuff. But I don't want to put this one out with
clean up the
I don't want to put this one out with the errors in it.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a good starting point, but I'm very happy with what you got us.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You took a lot
There's
of...
a lot.
It's a lot.
I can't lie, there's a lot of detail.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of stuff.
I guess the only other questions that's going to come up with is, I was kind of surprised to see how low the stormwater was of the sewers operating.
Right. And
So are we no longer going to approach the subject of creating a separate stormwater fee or not in the near term? Do you think we can function as, I know we had talked like a year or two ago about you somewhat informally tracking stormwater costs based on time. Is that something he incorporated into this a little?
With COVID, it was much more impossible.
Okay, that's fine. I was just curious. Yeah.
Just because we had staff,
No, just last time we had this discussion, we really had no idea what, the stormwater costs were kind of a black hole of, well, the guys do it when they have time, and, it's just sort of lost in the sewer fees.
And we had estimates at the time, but with, changing of the guard, so to speak, I really wanted to start fresh, with this. And they did take, last time we looked at it, we were going to actually move costs out of the sewer, which is, the right way to do it, I think. But my personal thought was, because you got a lot of pushback on, and part of it is people just don't understand it.
Well,
Like,
that's...
you're paying for it one way or the other.
I don't want to abandon it based on one public meeting if it is
Correct.
If it is a sound approach moving forward. But also if we can get by how we are and we can set a 3-year
Right.
rate structure as is and then revisit it then, I'm fine with that too. I just wanted to know if it was something we had looked at or if
And the way I thought of it, just in my own space, was let's see what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
If it doubles your sewer impacts, then let's talk about, because there is untapped customers right now that aren't paying for, they don't have sewer, they have a big parking lot, that kind of thing. There could be some equity distribution there, but we got to talk more about it, because I didn't see a ton of money there for
to warrant the...
Yeah, and
I think for you guys, the way you've been handling stormwater too, and Mike and I have kind of talked about it, is you're doing a lot in-house, right? So, Dan and Diane are the ones who are out doing all the sampling. When we looked at the IWRMP budget, there's a big chunk of money there. It's like, it
was like $250,000 for monitoring and sampling. I'm like, I don't think it's going to spend
and
that
so we
much.
modified that because that didn't seem to make sense, because I think that was under the assumption that you'd be hiring somebody to go out and do that, whereas those guys are taking that
We're
on.
doing a really good.
Yeah.
Doing a great
Actually,
job.
there's a lot of stuff that was in-house.
Yeah,
And I think, one of the costs up there was PVPC being part of the Connecticut River Stormwater Committee, but that's giving you access to, they're helping you with certain of the documents that need to be done for the MS4. They're helping with the outreach. That's why when we looked at the outreach number, and it was like, it's not going to be $66,000 a year. That's, and I don't know what PVP's current cost is for that, but I mean, it's historically been pretty reasonable. So, so we talked about that, and then we're coming into, and we'll get into this in a few minutes, but we're coming into year 5 of the current permit. I'm assuming you've gotten a letter like EPA is extending indefinitely. There's no date right now for when, and the way we saw the last permit roll out, it took them 10 years to give us a new permit. So that being said, there's still ongoing, you're still going to have to do the catchment investigations. You're going to have to keep up on IDDE. You're going to have to keep up on public outreach. It's kind of, the permit front-loaded a lot of the reporting and everything like that. And now you're kind of coming into, like, I'll say, the sustaining work that needs to be done. So it's, making sure you're doing your street sweeping and catch basin cleaning, doing the good housekeeping, doing your SWIPs and your SWIP inspections. The one thing that is coming up that'll be more of a dollar item is the requirement to start implementing the retrofit. So BMP retrofit. So if you guys know what that is, stop me. But essentially, you had to look at like municipal properties and see where you can install or upgrade best management practices, put in physical best management practices to better treat the stormwater. And here, you're going to be looking at trying to remove nitrogen because we're in the Long Island Sound TMDL. And I'll say right here, we're also looking at phosphorus because we're in the watershed to National Wannock Pond. So that's an actual like construction dollars. But that also could be small dollars if you look at some green infrastructure items like rain gardens or swales. And
our department and the planning department, everyone that's building stuff has gone after grant money for things
exactly.
like that.
Yep.
That I think we continue that rather than look to the community.
And when we were putting together the IWRMP and starting, having the conversations about, well, what else? So MS4 aside, what else are the capital projects that might be needed? It was Jim Gracia at the time. He didn't highlight any like significant flooding areas, which would be something that if there are any now, you might want to think about adding. There's some erosion areas. I think you're starting to.
Falls, yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I think the way I would describe our state of our stormwater, we have some large expenses that we need to take care of in the short term.
Right.
Once we fix some things that have deteriorated or outlasted their expected life, we can operate inside of our permit requirements without having to. That might be wishful thinking, but kind of my.
Yeah. The nice thing about a utility is that, the larger entities that have impervious surface pay more.
Right.
And you look at, I'm going to pick on Williston because they have a lot of property and a fair amount of impervious and they're tax exempt. So they're not paying property taxes, which may be assisting with, but some of your budget might be coming from that. So, on the highway side.
Yeah, I think I only brought it up because, when you really look at it, how abstracted it is, everything's based on water meter usage.
Right.
Which generates our sewage fees.
Yep.
Which then we use for stormwater infrastructure.
Right.
There's really, I understand it all works, but if you look at it, like you said, it can bring up inequities but, if it's single-digit percentages. Then, I just didn't know. A year ago, we didn't know if it was 40% of what sewer was.
And the other thing is, then you're going to have to also consider like what impact does it have on the mills? Because when I think about the impervious, the big impervious surface areas. I think some of those mills start to come up as, high on that list. And how do you balance the economic redevelopment potential there and with those costs? So that's other things to keep in mind.
That's an interesting point because what keeps tripping me up here is that you fund stormwater out of sewer. And if you go back to the old days, sewers and drains, they were one thing, and so it kind of makes sense, but it's just very unusual. Are there any activities that are funded out of highway that are really stormwater?
Street sweeping performed by the highway division.
So that's interesting because there is a number here for street sweeping here.
Or a replacement sweeper. Yep.
So stormwater would be buying a sweeper for the highway department on paper.
That's how it was put together to prevent that much debris from getting out of the catch because sweeping is a requirement.
Oh yeah, no, I understand. But
And I think
It's
that
not
was
like we're
part of
buying
the
a new sweeper for the sewer
IWRP,
department,
right?
and they're,
We
you know,
had some.
Yeah.
But I had
Wouldn't be-
additional street sweeping, catch
Yeah.
basin cleaning, and I thought I also saw a street sweeper.
It's in there, yeah.
yeah, I saw it when we were scanning.
We need one badly.
No, it's fine, it's just,
That's been on the list
It's
for
a
a while.
2006.
Yeah.
It's, we're spending way too much time and effort fixing it.
because when we look at stormwater utilities in communities that fund through the general fund, which is ironic because it is a storm tax at that point, not, going over to a fee. I think sometimes, you might want to keep some of those activities right where they are and just fund the additional permit-driven requirements in your stormwater utility. And that's a discussion that, we've had with other communities on how much do you transfer over. So, if you wanted to fund 100% of stormwater, you'd pull that highway, labor anyway, into there. So that's interesting. But yeah, I mean, the people are paying, and whether it's in proportion, it's probably closer. I don't know, it'd be interesting, because otherwise it's on property value, which has no meaning on anything. So it's
Yeah, no,
interesting.
it's a abstract cost for a community to distribute fairly.
And what we do sometimes too is you look at it either way, and they call it, I don't call it this, but they call it a wallow, winners and losers analysis, just to see who goes up, who goes down, because you got to manage it all. There's not one prescribed way to do this. It's what works best for, like balances economic development versus this. So, shall I pass the umbilical?
Great.
I guess.
Yeah, if there's no other
Unless there's-
questions
yeah,
or,
see if there's
One
other
meeting.
questions.
yeah, well,
Thanks, Mike.
I promise I'll be shorter.
all right. Thank you.
It's all good
You
information
had
to
a
talk
lot
about
of
and
good
get
stuff
out.
to go through.
No, this is very informative.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
mine's cool. Let's see. All
All
right.
right, if we are set, I will move on to item number 5, MS4 permit and compliance comments.
All right, so this is our annual presentation. I guess I'll introduce, I'm Tracy Adamski from Ty and Bond. I'm here with Tom LaCourte, who's assisting me on storm, all things MS4 these days. So this is, I guess, a meeting that has a couple of goals. One is to get you guys up to speed on where we are with the MS4 permit compliance. The other is this is actually helping us meet one of those permit compliance items. So every year there's supposed to be a public meeting that's held to discuss the stormwater management program. So there's a lot of some of the basic information that you guys have
this is
seen
that
before. And this is that meeting, correct. So and again to provide feedback that on the program here. So again, with the idea in mind of making sure everyone's aware of why we're here and why stormwater is important. Stormwater is the precipitation that falls on our ground, on paved streets, lawns, parking lots, and it can become polluted stormwater as it picks up oils and gases on the roadways, pet waste, fertilizers, whatever, and those end up going into our environment. And there have been a number of studies done, that identify an increase in impervious cover as resulting in a decrease in overall water quality. And so EPA established a program to start looking more at stormwater, which is what's called non-point source, because there's not a specific discharge point. And they started regulating municipal discharges. So under their MS4 program, which is Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, as opposed to a combined system, Mike had mentioned that's how original drains were done, combined sewer and storm sewer and sanitary sewer. So this is specific to separate storm sewer system, which thankfully most of our systems are these days. still jointly administered by EPA and DEP. And as you can see on the map, in the that's the below map, the majority of Easthampton is covered. There's just like little bits around Montown. So under the MS4 stormwater program, there are 6 minimum control measures that EPA has identified to meet the permit requirements. So they include public education and outreach, public involvement and participation, and that's the bullet that this meeting addresses today. Illicit discharge detection and elimination program, and then both construction and post-construction stormwater management, as well as good housekeeping and pollution prevention, which goes back to the catch basin cleanings and street sweeping and some other just general good housekeeping related to municipal facilities. And in addition to that, there's addressing the total maximum daily loads and impaired water body requirements, which we'll get into a little bit further on. But for Easthampton, it's really, we're in the Long Island Sound TMDL for nitrogen, and the other big one for us to consider is the phosphorus impairment for Nashawanack Pond.
Is Nashawanack in Easthampton?
Out the window.
Well, you think about how far away Long Island Sound is.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Nashawanack is. So reporting requirements back in September of 2018, that's
It's
when
a fake pond, but we won't say it. We're not even going to bring that up.
But you can canoe and kayak on it. There's nice little paddle boats out here now.
Catch a fish once in a while.
Whatever.
Pumpkin season. I used to skate on that pond. So back in 2018, the notice of intent was submitted that identified what your strategies were for meeting the permit. EPA issued a letter authorizing discharges from the municipal system as of 2019. And every September, there's an annual report that's due that documents what has been done in that previous year. And the stormwater management plan was finalized in 2019, and it includes more details on how we're actually complying with the permit. So it provides the regulatory background and summary of Easthampton's existing stormwater programs, identifies the various water resources and what those impairments are, identifies again the best management practices that you've been doing all these years to meet the requirements, and includes record keeping and reporting, and it's considered a living document. So all the samples that Dan and Diane have been taking, all those results are posted on the stormwater management page, because all of that information then goes into play for the stormwater management plan. And, I think as part of the work that they're doing, looking at all the outfalls and the junction manholes, they're also identifying potential new outfalls. I think there's a few that are, they're still trying to identify actually in the field. So I'm just going to go through, the compliance requirements and what you guys have been doing for some of the minimum control measures. So starting with public education and outreach, again, there's specific targeted messages that are required to be given to different entities. Because we're in Long Island Sound TMDL, you guys are required to do 4 messages to residences annually, and PVPC is pretty much covering those as part of your commitment to the Connecticut River Stormwater Committee. So for the most part, your public education is being handled there, which is a great service. The public involvement and participation, the 2 requirements again are having an annual meeting to discuss the program, and also to have the stormwater management plan to be available for the public to view. So it's both at the city engineer's office, and it's also posted on the website. The illicit discharge detection and elimination program is probably the one with the biggest meat, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on as well. But annually, there's a sanitary sewer overflow inventory. So if there have been any overflows, that's documented. As additional field work is done, there's updates to the map of the storm sewer system. So outfall screening and dry weather sampling has been completed, and there's catchment investigations that are starting. I think Dan's working on identifying, where all those junctions are, and then, the next step will be going out there and starting to do actual sampling and looking at them. The last time I was in front of you guys, we were talking about the stormwater management ordinance. So that was put into place and approved last July. Mass DEP still has not come out with their stormwater standards, so we'll just move on from that. But we still don't know exactly how they're going to be modifying theirs. I think I asked them a couple months ago, and they keep saying it'll be out in a few months. So at some point, we might want to look back at what we have in the ordinances versus what they have coming out. Good housekeeping. So you have a stormwater pollution prevention plan for the highway, garage, and recycling center. So quarterly inspections ought to be done at those facilities. There was a good housekeeping operation and maintenance plan with standard operating procedures that was included in that, and that included all municipal facilities. I think we identified, park and rec, schools, building maintenance, as well as DPW related activities. So it's continued implementation of those practices. And, we've already talked about the catch basin cleaning and the street sweeping, that those need to be done just more often. And then finally, record keeping. And there's some pretty specific requirements by EPA for what records need to be kept and then provided back with the annual reports. So now talking about our TMDLs, and we're in the middle of the Long Island Sound watershed, but it means the public education and outreach messages are increased, which you're addressing. When we developed the stormwater ordinance, we included language about optimizing nitrogen removal for best management practice, structural best management practices that are put in place for new developments. There's a requirement of using slow-release fertilizers on city-owned property, and I think there's limited fertilizer use anyway. This is one of the reasons why you're doing more street sweeping. We're in the process right now of doing the nitrogen source identification report. So that's a town-wide report looking at, land uses and identifying, where might be some areas of concern with respect to nitrogen. And when we talk about retrofit, if you're, installing new best management practices on municipal properties, we need to start looking at, what can they remove nitrogen as well. And so Nashawanak Pond has a phosphorus impairment. So similarly, there's enhanced public education and outreach. Similarly, we incorporated language about phosphorus. Actually, I think we kept it a bit general and just make sure that, if you're in a watershed for a water body that's impaired, BMPs ought to be designed to address those impairments. There's requirements for managing grass cuttings and leaf litter on city-owned property. Again, just making sure those aren't going in the catch basins or into the water resources. Street sweeping, this is the same requirements. And we're also working on the phosphorus source identification report. So instead of the entire town, we're only looking here at the Nashawanak Pond watershed for the phosphorus removal. And for properties, for municipal properties within the watershed of Nashawanak Pond, when you're looking at new BMPs, you need to look at phosphorus removal rates as well. And a lot of the best management practices are going to remove both. So current efforts for permit year 4, are to update the priority ranking of outfalls based on the dry weather screening that occurred. And so 141 outfalls were inspected for dry weather flows and 40 were tested. And then there's also the requirement to start the catchment investigations. And there have been 154 junction manholes that have been identified. And so, there'll be dry weather screening associated with those manholes, and then wet weather screening for the outfalls. And that's all work that's being done internally to the city.
Does that mean that only 40 have flow?
40 of the 141 were sampled.
Yep.
But you sample everyone that's flowing?
You
during
sample
dry?
everyone that's
Okay.
flowing. Yep.
Well, that's pretty good.
So combine the MCMs 4 and 5. So 4 is having in place your requirements for construction-related stormwater management, so that's your erosion and sediment controls. And then the MCM 5 is looking at new development and redevelopment and stormwater management. And really the things here are to take a look at the regulatory, your current regulations. So your zoning, subdivision, to see if there's opportunities to allow for green infrastructure, as well as to see if there's subdivision is a prime one for this. Are your street standards, the paving standards, so wide that maybe you can kind of pare those back a little bit so that you can minimize the amount of impervious surface that's required for certain designs. Could also look at like parking requirements for new developments. Is it possible to have overflow parking be pervious instead of impervious surfaces? So that's the assessment related to the existing regulations. I believe the retrofit inventory has already been done, and there's a green infrastructure master plan that identified 21 priority sites. So that's where your retrofit sites are going to be coming from. And in general, it's continuing to track your site plan reviews and inspections as well. That's part of the annual reporting requirements. But, again, making sure that construction is happening in a environmentally friendly way. So usually we just look ahead to, one permit year, but we're kind of at the point where, next year is the end of the original 5-year permit for the MS, for this round of the MS4. But the requirements within the permit actually extended out 10 years. I think EPA realizing they weren't going to get to reissuing the permit in right at that 5-year mark. So it's a lot of continuation of the same thing, as we discussed before. So it's continuing the outreach. It's going to be continuing, the public participation opportunities. It's continuing the catchment investigations and wet weather screening. So IDDE was a big issue for EPA in this permit, and I think that's just going to be continuing on. Like, what are activities you can do to identify if there is some illicit discharge within the system, and then identifying BMP retrofit project for implementation come year 6. So year 5, I think you're starting to look at, design and where do we want to do this, what can we do, so that you're ready for year 6 to actually, put something in the ground. So in general, you are actively meeting your MS4 requirements, with a combination of, our assistants, Western O'Neill's assistants, staff, but, you're checking the check boxes. This year, the annual report is due September 27th, so that's when we'll be, the city will be documenting.
Could you try?
Sorry about that. That's when the city will be documenting, all of your activities for this year. And as I noted, the general permit has recently, I think all permittees have gotten letters administrating administratively continuing their permit coverage beyond July 1st of this year. Because if you don't remember, this was a 5-year permit, but they had a 1-year delay in its effectiveness. So that's why we're in year 4, but we haven't done year 5 activities yet. But again, they haven't put an end date to that continuation. It's, you know, until a new general permit is out, or you have an individual permit, or, you know, some other permitting pathway is identified. So, you know, again, this is what you've been doing is kind of what you can foresee doing for the next, I would say, 5 or so years. So, with the addition of starting to implement some of those retrofit options. Their requirement is that you always have a list of 5 until you've, you know, knocked them all off, but have a list of 5 opportunities to do retrofit, and then, you know, to kind of work through that list. So you have a list of 21 now, and then I think, you know, you have some time. There's no requirement that you have to do retrofits every year. You know, they want you to get one in the ground year 6, but then, you know, I think as long as you're working towards something, you know, making improvements, that's the and that is the end. So I don't know if you guys have any.
Are those retrofits on municipal properties or on private properties?
So it's on municipal properties.
Municipal
Yep.
properties. Okay.
So there's a project like Cherry Street, the green infrastructure. How many, does that count as one EMP retrofit or multi, or?
So I don't know the full details, but yeah, I
It's
mean,
not like we're replacing one catch basin, we're doing a whole street.
right.
And the outfall at the,
Yep.
Curious, I'm just curious what that count is.
Yeah.
Prospect Street, we did that whole drainage at the end of, was it?
Yeah, we just.
that was conventional repairs. Missed an opportunity.
That was,
Had to be done.
yeah.
But, you know, you think about things like the new school. You know, there's upgraded best management practices that went in there that, you know, are a definite increase above what was existing.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at other building projects that might happen, you know, there's opportunities there to do retrofits. So, you know, I think it's one of those things just to keep in mind as, you know, you're redeveloping or expanding or, you know, modifying existing facilities to, you know, kind of work those into the project.
Excellent.
Very good.
Do you have a copy of that report? Or just iPad?
I have hard copies, and I can also email it.
I have it, I have it on.
Oh,
that
do you? I
phone,
just
yeah.
need to have a copy to go with the minutes.
Oh, right there.
Yep, and actually, do you want a hard copy?
Yeah, I'll put it in my file.
Yep, sure. Absolutely.
But yeah, if you could email
Greg, do you
one
want one?
copy.
Sure, thanks, Tracy.
We'll need to get one to Steve, who's not here.
Okay, so email's the best way to get that.
Yeah, we can distribute it.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you very much for your
Great.
time. Any update?
Yeah, no. Thank you guys. It was a good discussion today.
All right, if that concludes that, we just have item number 6, the director's report.
Okay, I'll try to keep it, fairly short for you guys tonight, but a few just dates to talk about. Friday, we did put the finished pavement on Prospect Street and Hill Avenue and Searle Avenue. Those 3 streets are done. They'll be back in the next few weeks. That we're going to mill and pave Friel Drive on Park Street. That's the last piece of this effort. Cherry Street, the anticipated start date for all the GI work that we've been kind of talking about is scheduled for the end of July or the beginning of August. Get a more concrete date yet. I'll get you one as soon as I have it. Some small work may happen over the next several weeks. Project signs, big safe markings, things like that. No substantial work will start until the end of July. Union Street, we're still waiting to hear on a schedule for the pre-construction meeting. It was held a couple weeks ago. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, so hopefully I'll have a date as soon as I do. share that out, but that's really the only update I can give you on construction start for Union Street this time. We're just working on closing out the fiscal year, FY22, with some capital appropriations that we have through, just getting everything lined up on POs and making sure that projects that we funded are moving along, and we have everything getting closed out. We have grant applications that have been submitted for the complete streets effort to upgrade the crossing at East Green and Hoyoke Streets.
Okay.
That has been in. We're awaiting a decision on that one, and the Long Island Sound Futures Fund. We've got an application into them for grant funding to replace the aerators at the wastewater treatment plant, lower those nitrogen levels.
Right.
Also waiting for a board decision on that. Hopefully know something about those in the next couple of months. We did send out a number of letters last week to residents regarding overgrowth on their property, blocking the sidewalk at multiple locations in the city. So just want to make the board aware of that. That is something we'll be sending more and more out as we get more and more complaints. People are listening. We've got a couple calls and questions about how to correct it. So just want to keep the sidewalk passable. And I always like to. Tomorrow we have some inspection scheduled with Mass DEP at the closed landfills on Loudville and Alder Street. So,
Okay.
you guys are aware that those are DPW responsibilities, but I'd like to talk about them in a public setting about that way, as we have to fund things that need to happen there.
Yeah, no,
People are
fair.
aware that we still have to manage those as other closed.
It's a long tail on those.
Yes, yes.
Only question I had was, in my neighborhood, I noticed some no parking signs went up at the end of Stone Path Lane.
There was, police department had some trouble there with parking during church services.
Yep.
I believe, and we were asked to put those up at their request, and it was a designated no parking zone in the city ordinances.
Right.
And the signs just over the years. I couldn't tell you what happened to it.
Okay, no, I was just curious. And are we going to stripe it similar to the no parking on Clark Street and Holyoke Street across from that? It's sort of like a yellow striped band.
We can. I'll have to look at what needs to happen.
Just so it's consistent with other no parking zones.
Sure.
Because I've still noticed quite a bit of parking there since they've gone up. So.
Okay.
And they're also at such a long interval.
Yeah.
I don't know if people have noticed.
Yeah.
I was just curious what was the impetus for
Yeah, it was a request of the police department. I was surprised to see that it's written right into the city ordinances,
well, yeah.
but they're gone. I can tell you what happened to the signs.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Any questions for Greg?
Not for me.
Go home and digest.
Yes, yes.
Actually, if I may I ask a follow-up question?
Surely.
What is your schedule for, and you are the rate approval board, that's it, right? You
Correct.
go, boom, done.
There's a little more to that, but yeah.
But we don't go.
That's what we tried last
City
time.
council or, okay, so what are you thinking for timing? What is your timing?
I mean, that all depends on, what our routine, where we think we want to start a new cycle.
Because you set 23.
We did not.
We did, no,
Oh, okay.
we did an emergency rate change for 22 because we were expecting a shortfall.
FY21, and then we left them unchanged.
Yes.
Yeah,
For 22.
it's already been an extra year in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, I lost a year.
So it's not a defined,
No, no.
by,
No, the board has historically set them on an as-need basis, like
Okay,
when we need to
okay.
make an adjustment. We like to try and have them come into line with a fiscal year. So,
right,
But
that's,
we're gonna have a hard time with that.
yeah,
well, that's where I'm,
yeah,
yeah.
Ambitious to do it by.
yeah, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Do you bill,
Quarterly.
Quarterly.
yeah. do you
One
read
quarter of the
quarterly?
city, one quarter of the city gets billed quarterly, so it's a rolling.
Okay, all right.
And we can read the entire city in 5 days, 4 to 5 days. So
Okay.
So,
Because it's always,
you can. Processing those bills is another.
right, it's just nice to change the rates before people start using the water.
Yeah,
Correct.
sure.
that's the only other.
Right.
Maybe we look at January 1st or.
Oh, okay, all right.
Right, I sort of had hypothetically, like, oh, can we do like an interim one and then, set a rate for 6 months and then catch back up, but then only half the community would have paid those rates. I'd like to try and keep it to a full year, but I also don't want them to be out of phase with the fiscal year. So we'll have to figure something out. We're in odd timing right now, but I want to be equitable, if we roll in a new rate. But yeah, we also want to have a little bit longer of a tail on, from getting information from you, doing workshops as a board, and also having a lot more public outreach before we actually have a public meeting. We sort of saw how compressed that was the last time.
Yeah, and
I mean, we're not under the gun of expecting a shortfall or anything, but it's just, when can we start to get some of these larger projects on the books and funded, and
and it's the same.
I also don't want to rush it into a 1 year. I mean, if we need to do a 1 year, that's fine, but I would like to see a more paced rollout of this is what it's going to be like for 3 years or 5 years, and have that as more of a regular cycle moving forward, that it's not a stopgap. That seems to, looking back at the rates, that's how they've always been processed. It's like, ooh, we're going to be short this year, and then it's an increase.
There's a lot to consider, and one of the things I look at, and I don't know if I think it's a made-up phrase, but capital volatility, like how much do you have going on? And depending on you guys have the ability to change your rates, so it's better, but when you're like a city council kind of thing, I worked with one community that had a lot going on with wastewater, and they set 5 years of rates, and we sweated 4.5 years of trying to fit different reports and things that got changed and had to keep under that.
There's also, with one of our rate changes, we rescinded a rate that was coming. Like if we set a 5-year rate plan, if year 3 we realize projections are all wrong, the costs are all wrong, we can come back in 3 years and strike these two from this point forward. It's going to be, instead of another 3 or 5 or whatever.
And when we do the public outreach, we can think about, like the same thing with the school. I see, people, they're reacting to news, and when you look at the dollars, it might be, not, it's something you have to be careful with, but sometimes it's not as bad as you think.
Well, I found it when we set the shortfall rate that we did. I was a little gun shy after the public meeting we had at the last rate hearing proposal. But I found that, we were well prepared, we explained it, and it was well received and approved. So, I kind of am looking for a similar situation to that where, like you said, I also, the reason I'm sort of interested in the long-term rate setting is both for a long-term capital plan, but also so people don't feel like we come back every year asking for more money. Like if we can sit down and say, we have there's been a lot of deferred maintenance, there's been a lot of deferred capital improvement, there's been a lot of deferred rate increases. If we can say, like, we have a plan for 5 years, and this is what it's going to cost, and we can kind of digest that all at once and hopefully see that as a public good, rather than, we want to do this one more big project. It's going to be a 20% increase this year. Oh, it's going to be a 15% increase this year.
That's right.
If we can say it's going to be 12.5 every year, or 10 or whatever it works out to be, then it's, as long, I feel like if people understand we have a reason for doing this.
Well, usually that's the play of the DPW director. They say, "What'd you do with the money we gave you last year?" That's it, because it always.
That's where the city council is meeting.
Upstairs.
Yep.
So,
No, it's a good way to go.
I don't
And
think.
then show like what you were able to show, Mike, and then, yes, it stinks, but it's $180 a year. It's not $1,000 a year, like when our properties.
I sweat that as much as anyone does.
Or like Huntington's water and sewer. We family of 2 right now, we pay $300 a quarter per 2 people.
How much water do you use?
There's only like 300 and something people on that.
That's
Yeah.
that's another thing that helps.
And you have to pay for a system that's almost as big as Easthampton.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think there's a critical start date, but it's the sooner we can do, the sooner we can get your guys to work and get those big ones picked off. But
I keep thinking, Greg, is that you know, we have high priority was in the next 5 years, but as we start looking as well, is it high priority? Is one more year, you know, like really getting kind of granular on that stuff to know what to schedule for when, so that you don't.
I think anything that's declared high priority is that for a reason. You know, we have.
Yeah, but we're gonna have to show that.
Yep.
When we go to the public, we're gonna say, this is what needs to be done.
Well,
And we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna, and then a lot of it'll be financed by debt service, right? Is that?
Well, not a lot of it.
No, it wasn't too bad.
It didn't look, no, that's true.
I mean, there was 2 or 3 projects, but yeah, they were all in the multi-million, where all the others were hundreds of thousands out of retained
But you
earnings.
can bundle, because I don't know, I've gotten pushback. You get pushback from FinComs on why using retained earnings. It's fine, it's an appropriate use to a degree, you know. And then debt, someone said that they were, you know, putting a burden on the future generations. It's like, well, it's a 20-year note.
Yeah.
The infrastructure has at least that life. You're paying for what you're using.
You're
It's
amortizing
what
it
makes
out.
the most sense for you and your customers. If more debt is going to, you know, ease
Smooth
that,
out the curve.
and then, you know, I don't know. I don't personally have a problem with it, especially before rates go back up to
Well, yeah.
13. I tried to see what the highest the SRF has ever been. I couldn't just find it. You know, I did some research and I found 12% back in, or that was the market rate back in like the 90s, but
Yeah.
I'm curious to see where that could go again. So.
Yeah, I mean, currently we have, well, you saw where our retained earnings are, so we have a little bit of cushion.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a process we want to get kicked off. We just need to, you know, and part of that discussion will be, when do we need this to go into effect? And, you know, do we want to be out of cycle with the fiscal year and that'll just get evened out in the projections, or is it just make the math easier if it lines up? But yeah, I think we should at least keep the whole year billing cycle changes to avoid, you know, half the community paying a rate.
That would be good. Yeah.
But if it's unavoidable, we'll have to just explain why that is.
And it may be. Yeah.
Yeah, at least for the small first year rolling. We'll definitely get public input. I guess my only other question I forgot to ask, if it's separate from what you've been tasked to do now, but I know you had mentioned you'd like to see some updating to the sort of regulations as to like multimeter, you know, dual metering and modernizing our, you know, code in that sense.
We can, I do want to do that. We have our regulation document is really one that would only be approved by the board.
Yeah.
And then the fees in there would not, some need to change, go up, and some need to be put in place that aren't there now. But I don't think the money we can bring in there would make a huge difference as far as
I'm not saying it would impact this because it's really just shuffling the buckets around, but like who develops that new language? Like I know you developed language that we send to city council, but like who?
Myself and utility supervisor.
Okay. I just didn't know where that fit into this process of like modernizing our, and I guess I'll look through this more closely, but did you give us any like rate tables or was it just aggregate numbers for revenue?
Just aggregate numbers.
Okay.
It's funny, I always forget when you go to a hearing, you gotta have the numbers to vote.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can.
Just to see where they are, and also like we had talked about, I forget what we call it, basically like the meter fee.
Yeah,
that
we did.
Sort of, that low,
we did talk about meter sizing fees. I know Northampton does that, where they.
Where ours are way disproportionate, where we charge like $3 or $8, and other communities charge 40 or 50. And I know that's kind of a regressive fee in that it's everybody regardless of usage, but like, you know, do we need to sort of look at swinging that to sort of bring those up?
It shifts, you know, the water system is based on peak demand is really what it's sized for. So by using base fees that go up with the size of your connection, you're shifting some of the cost to the larger users. And I think that's fine. You know, we can call it the readiness to serve. It's a well-accepted practice.
Yeah, I just know ours are sort of out of sync with some of the surrounding communities.
When I looked at it's like, I think you get like 6% of your revenue from water from base fees. Like, okay, you know, and it has nothing to do with the meters themselves, and it's, you're just sharing that base component of your usage. But you also had pretty low summer to winter numbers. So it's not a ton of irrigation that's driving like water conservation. Residential per capita was pretty low, so, you know,
Yeah, and I know like some other communities charge for like a sewer fee, either a flat fee or like an initial like $300 fee, and then usage over X is
Yeah,
rated, you know, if that's something we want to look at, or if we want to stick with our current system. It's just, you know, things to talk about as a board and DPW. You
I
know.
don't know if I got meters, I think I do have meter size inventory. We can look at what that looks like.
Yeah, I think there was a rough breakdown in the IWRMP.
No, even in the billing data, I think it
Should be
might
there.
have it in there.
Yeah, it
should be there.
So, yeah, we can.
Yeah, I mean,
Again, it's about equity.
we still need
you
the
know?
same amount of money at the end of the day. It's just how you equitably spread it out.
Well,
And
yeah, and that's the crazy thing is that it's a fixed system, right? So if you want one person or group of people to pay less, others have to pay more.
Yeah, there's no-
there's
it's got to balance all checksum
yeah.
at the end.
So I used to say it's like a water bed, but nobody knows what that is. You push down here, it goes up over there. So.
Yeah.
No, it's about
I just wanna-
fitting
yeah.
your community and
Yeah.
your you know. So it's interesting stuff.
All right. Yep.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So I said to Tracy, I'm like, interesting. You have to caveat that. Not interesting to normal people, but interesting.
But, yeah.
It is interesting.
All right. Well, if we've talked all topics on the agenda that anybody has questions on as of now,
Good.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting at 6:52.
And I will second that.
Thank you guys
Our
for your time this
second
evening.
longest meeting.
That is our,
Thomas Mulberry,
Yes.
William Bagby,
yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
All right.
Next meeting, June 15th.
Yep.
Okay.
Joke at my FinCom, like, what if you don't get a second, you can't adjourn?
Oh, yeah. Then there's more to discuss.
It's good to be back.
All right.
It is nice to meet face to face again.
Yes, it is.
If we